Hey, child of God, you're safe here. If you're tired, if your mind is still running even though your body wants to stop, if you've had a heavy day or a heavy week or a heavy season that seems like it just won't let up, this space was made for you. Tonight we are going to spend time with the parables of Jesus, the stories he told, the ones he sat down and shared with tired people on hillsides and shorelines and dusty roads, stories that are still alive tonight, 2,000 years later, still finding people exactly where they are, still doing something quiet and important in the hearts of anyone willing to listen. Before we begin, I would love for you to take just a moment and leave a comment below. Tell me what time it is, where you are, and if there is something on your heart tonight, leave a prayer request too, so that this community can lift you up. You are not alone in this space. There are people all over the world resting here with you right now. And if this reading brings you peace, if it helps you breathe a little slower and rest a little deeper, please consider subscribing so that you never miss a night like this one. We are on a journey toward 100,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins this community helps these quiet readings reach someone else who needs them tonight. Now let's pray before we begin. Father, tonight we come to you with whatever we are carrying. We come tired, and we come hopeful, and we come exactly as we are, without pretending to be further along than we are. Tonight we are going to sit with the stories your son told, the parables, the ones he gave to farmers and fishermen and broken people and searching people, and people who had done everything wrong, and people who had done everything right and still felt like something was missing. We ask that those same stories would find us tonight wherever we are. And let them go past the busy part of our minds and settle somewhere deep and quiet. Let them plant something in us tonight that grows long after we have fallen asleep. Guard our rest, calm what is anxious, quiet what is loud, and remind us before we close our eyes that we are known and we are loved and we are not as lost as we sometimes feel. In Jesus' name, amen. Now take a slow breath in and let it out. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands go still. You do not have to go anywhere tonight. And you do not have to figure anything out. All you have to do right now is listen. This is the story of the man who spoke in stories. There was a time about 2,000 years ago when the most powerful teachers in the world stood in front of crowds and spoke in lists. They listed rules. They listed laws. They listed the names of other famous teachers who had come before them, quoting those teachers word for word so that the people listening would know how educated they were. They spoke in long and complicated sentences that took a long time to say and an even longer time to understand. They wore robes with very wide hems. They sat in the most important seats. They liked being called by their titles. And then there was Jesus. Jesus did not carry a list. He carried stories. He grew up in a small town called Nazareth, in a region called Galilee, in the country we now know as Israel. It was a town so small and so ordinary that when a man named Nathanael first heard about Jesus of Nazareth, and his immediate response was, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" That is how small it was. That is how little anyone expected from it. His father, Joseph, was a carpenter, which means Jesus grew up watching a man take rough, unfinished wood and turn it into something useful and true. He grew up with sawdust in the air and the smell of cedar in his clothes. He grew up understanding that things which look plain on the outside can be shaped over time and with great patience, and into something that lasts. He understood this about wood. He understood it about people too. When Jesus began his public teaching, he was around 30 years old. He walked from town to town along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, a freshwater lake about 13 miles long in the northern part of Israel. The hills around that lake were covered in wildflowers in the spring. The fishermen who worked those waters pulled in tilapia and catfish and sardines. The roads were dusty and hot. When the people who walked them were tired, they were tired the way people are tired when life has been hard for a very long time and they are not sure it will ever get easier. Jesus sat down with those people, not above them, not in front of a podium with guards standing on either side. He sat on hillsides, he sat in boats, he sat in courtyards and on the shores of lakes and at the tables of people who were considered by the rest of society to be the wrong kind of people to eat with. And he told them stories. His disciples, the 12 men who traveled with him everywhere, had noticed something early on. When Jesus explained a teaching directly, when he said, "Here's the truth, plain and simple," some people understood it and some people did not, and the ones who did not simply walked away confused. But when Jesus told a story, something different happened. People leaned forward. And even the ones who did not fully understand the story still felt something while they were listening. Something moved in them, some old quiet question that they had been carrying around for years without knowing how to ask it would stir in their chest and get warm. They did not always know what the story meant, but they knew it was about them. That was the point. That was always the point. Jesus once explained to his disciples why he taught this way. He told them that stories were like seeds. When you hand a truth to someone directly, they can take it or leave it. They can argue with it. They can put it on a shelf somewhere and walk away. But when you plant a truth inside a story, something different happens. The story gets inside a person first. It gets comfortable. It sits down in the place where feelings live. And then, later, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks later, sometimes years later, the truth at the center of it begins to grow. And he knew this because he was a carpenter's son. He knew that the most important things grow slowly. He knew that the strongest trees start as the smallest seeds. He told stories about farmers. He told stories about shepherds and fathers and widows and businessmen and sons who made terrible decisions and servants who were trusted with great things and people who found, completely by accident, something so valuable that it changed the entire direction of their lives. And he told stories about what God is like, not what God looks like, not where God lives or how God is organized or what the correct procedure is for approaching God, what God is like, what God does when something is lost, what God does when someone comes home, what God does in the dark while the seed is underground and nothing seems to be happening and the person who planted it is starting to wonder if anything will ever come up. He told stories about that, and every single one of those stories, and 2,000 years later, is still growing. There is something worth staying with for a moment before we go further into these stories tonight. Jesus chose ordinary things to talk about. He did not choose grand, complicated images from philosophy or politics or the mechanics of the universe, though he could have. He was the one, the Gospel of John tells us, through whom all things were made. He could have described the architecture of galaxies. He could have explained the mathematics of creation. He could have impressed everyone in the crowd with the sheer scale of what he knew. Instead, he talked about farmers. He talked about a woman who lost a coin in her house. He talked about a shepherd counting sheep at the end of the day. He talked about a father watching a road. He talked about bread and seeds and lamps and vineyards and fishing nets and fig trees. And he talked about the things that the people in the crowd dealt with every single day, because he wanted them to understand that the kingdom of God was not something far away and inaccessible. kept behind a gate that only the educated and the impressive could open. The kingdom of God was close. It was as close as the field outside town, as close as the lamp on the table, as close as the road that led back home, as close tonight as the quiet you are resting in right now. His disciples asked him once, recorded in the book of Matthew, why he spoke to the people in parables. It is a fair question. Jesus had important things to say. Why not just say them plainly? Why not write it all down in a clear and ordered list? Jesus gave them an answer. He said the parables revealed truth to those whose hearts were open and concealed it from those whose hearts were closed, not as a punishment, but the way all deep things work. A painting looks like colored smears to someone who has never learned to look. Music sounds like noise to someone who has never learned to listen. The parables were not a code meant to keep people out. They were a doorway designed for a certain kind of entering, the kind where you come as you are, not as you wish you were, the kind where you sit down with the story without knowing where it is going, the kind where you let it work on you before you decide what you think about it. Tonight, that is all you have to do. You do not have to understand everything. You do not have to take notes. You do not have to arrive at a conclusion by the time you fall asleep. You just have to be willing to receive, to let the story settle in you the way seeds settle in soil, quietly, in the dark, without noise. The stories Jesus told were not meant to stay in the first century. They were not meant for a specific kind of person or a specific kind of life. They are not historical artifacts preserved behind glass for scholars to examine from a safe distance. They are alive. They grow. Every person who has ever sat with one of these stories long enough has found eventually that the story was not about someone else. It was about them. It was always about them. So let's begin. Let your body settle a little more into wherever you are resting tonight. Let your breathing slow down. The day is done. Whatever was not finished today will still be there to return to, but right now, in this moment, there is nowhere to be except here. The stories are about to start, and one of them has been waiting a very long time to find you. The first story Jesus told about a farmer started the way all farm stories start. Someone needed to plant something. It was planting season in Galilee. The air smelled like turned earth and like rain that had arrived just in time. The farmer rose before the sun. All of the way farmers always do, loaded his seed bag over his shoulder and walked out into his field to do what his father had done and what his grandfather had done before that. He went out to plant. That is how farming worked in that part of the world at that time. You did not dig individual holes for each seed. You did not measure careful rows with string and stakes. You walked through your field and you threw handfuls of seed into the air and let them fall where they fell and trusted the earth to do the rest. It was not a precise science. It was not a controlled process. It was an act of faith performed in the open air, repeated every single year, with no guarantee of what would come back. The farmer scattered his seed, and the seed fell in 4 different places. Some of it fell on the path that ran along the edge of the field. Now, a path in that kind of farming community was not just a small footway at the edge of someone's garden. It was a road worn down by years and years of feet and animals and cartwheels, pressing the earth flat and hard. The soil on that path was packed so tightly that it had stopped being soil in any meaningful sense. It was almost stone, and when the seed landed on it, the seed just lay there on the surface, exposed and still, with nowhere to go. Before an hour had passed, the birds came, and they always came. The birds knew the paths. They watched the farmers scatter seed the way a person watches a table being set for dinner. They came down and they ate every single grain that had landed on the hard ground. Not one seed that fell on the path survived. It was gone before it had any chance to become anything at all. Some of the seed fell on rocky ground, not ground covered in rocks you could see and move out of the way. The rocky ground Jesus was describing was a particular kind of problem that farmers in that region knew very well. It was ground that looked fine on the surface. It had a thin layer of decent soil over it. But just a few inches down, there was a flat shelf of solid limestone running underneath, invisible from above, stopping everything. This seed actually sprouted. It came up fast. Because the soil was shallow and the limestone underneath held warmth close to the surface, the little plants shot up quickly and looked, for a short while, more promising than anything else in the field. They were green and bright and growing ahead of schedule. Anyone walking past that patch of ground in the first few days after planting would have pointed at it and said, "Look at that. That is the good ground. That is the part of the field that is going to produce something wonderful." But the roots had nowhere to go. When you are growing in shallow ground, there is only so far down you can reach, and when the sun came up strong in the middle of the day, beating down on the field the way a Galilean summer sun beats down, those shallow-rooted plants had no moisture deep enough to draw from. The limestone underneath had trapped the warmth but held no water. The plants reached down for what they needed and found nothing there. They wilted. They browned. By the time the afternoon was done, they were gone. The most promising-looking ground had produced nothing that lasted. Some of the seed fell among thorns. This was perhaps the most frustrating of the four soils, because it was the one that came the closest. The ground there looked reasonable. It looked good even. There were no obvious rocks. The path did not run through it. It appeared, from every surface measurement a farmer could make, to be good planting ground. But underneath the soil, thorn roots had been working for years, spreading quietly in every direction without being seen, growing sideways and deep and wide in the dark. The way things you cannot see sometimes grow faster than the things you can. When the farmer's good seed began to grow, the thorn plants grew alongside it, and then they grew faster. They grew bigger. They reached for the water and the sunlight and the nutrients before the good plants could get to them. They choked the good plants out. They used up all the room. And the good seed grew tall enough to see the sun and then stopped, shaded out, crowded out, starved out by something that had been in the ground long before the farmer ever arrived. The good seed never produced anything. It tried. It really tried. But what was growing around it was stronger, and then some of the seed fell on good soil. Good soil is not dramatic to look at. It does not announce itself. It does not shine or sparkle or catch the eye of anyone walking past. It looks from a distance, not like all the other dirt in the field. It is simply deep and open and ready, the kind of ground that has been broken up and turned over enough times that there is space in it, actual space, between the particles, space for water and air and roots to move into and make themselves at home. The seed that fell on good soil went down into the dark and the quiet and began, slowly and without any noise at all, to become what it was always meant to be. The roots went down first, before anything was visible above the surface, deep and wider and further, reaching into the earth the way a hand reaches into something unfamiliar, carefully at first and then with more confidence. And then the shoot came up, slow and pale green and small, and the sun warmed it, and the rain fed it, and the roots kept going down even as the plant kept going up, and the good soil produced a harvest of 30, 60, 100 times what had been planted 100 times. If you planted one seed in good soil and got back 100 seeds at harvest, that is not just a good return. In the farming world of first century Galilee, where a bad harvest could mean your family went hungry, where the difference between a good year and a bad year was the difference between surviving and not, a harvest of 100 times what you planted was almost beyond imagining. It was abundance. It was more than enough. It was the kind of harvest that changes not just this year, but the years after it. Jesus finished the story and looked at the crowd sitting around him on the hillside. He said, "Let whoever has ears to hear, hear." His disciples came to him later, when the crowd had spread out and some people were eating and some were resting in the afternoon shade. They came to him quietly and they asked him to explain what the story meant. Jesus explained it to them like this: the seed is the word, and the truth he was planting with everything he said and did and was. Every teaching, every story, every moment of healing and restoration and grace that he poured into the world. The seed is that. The path is a person who hears it but never really receives it. It lands on the surface of their life and lies there for a moment and is gone before the day is over, distracted, crowded out, taken before it had any real chance. The truth passed through and left nothing behind. At the rocky ground is a person who receives the word with immediate and genuine enthusiasm. They love it. It excites them. They feel it in a real way. And for a while, watching them, you would say that something real is happening here. Something is taking root. But the enthusiasm sits on top of something shallow. There is no depth. And so when difficulty comes, when the cost of believing something becomes real and specific and personal, when faith stops being exciting and starts being hard, they are gone. The roots had nowhere deep to go, and when the heat came, there was nothing to sustain them. The thorny ground is the one that is the hardest to talk about, because it is the one that comes the closest. The thorny ground is a person who genuinely begins to grow. Something real starts to happen in them. If you watched from outside, you would say, yes, something is taking root here. This is the real thing. But the worries of this life are growing too. The pull of wanting things, on the noise of needing things, the anxiety about money and status and what other people think and whether everything is going to work out. Those things were already in the ground before the good seed arrived, and they grow faster. They use up all the space. They crowd out the thing that was trying to grow, not all at once, not dramatically, quietly, slowly, until one day a person looks at their own life and realizes that the thing they thought was growing in them has been choked out by things that were never supposed to be there. And the good soil is the person who hears the word and holds it, who stays with it when nothing seems to be happening, who trusts the process that is invisible, the deep, slow work of roots going down before anything comes up, who does not abandon the seed in the ground just because it has not shown itself above the surface yet, who keeps the ground broken up and open, who keeps the thorns pulled, who stays, and who in time, without any announcement, without any dramatic moment, simply begins to produce something 30 times larger than the seed, something 60 times, something 100 times what was originally planted. Now here's the thing about this story that is easy to miss. Jesus did not say the farmer was careless. He did not say the farmer made a mistake by scattering seed on the path and the rocky ground and the thorny ground. The farmer scattered the seed everywhere because that is how a farmer plants, with open hands, generously, without holding back, without first calculating which ground deserves the seed and which ground does not. The farmer scattered. He gave the seed to all 4 kinds of ground. which means that the God this story is describing is not a careful, measured God who only plants in the places that look most promising, who only gives truth and grace and love to the people who appear most likely to use it well, who looks at the hard ground and the shallow ground and the thorny ground and decides those places are not worth the seed. This is a God who scatters extravagantly, broadly, without holding back. The seed goes everywhere. All four of those soils received the same seed from the same hand. What was different was not the seed. What was different was the ground. And here is what makes this story personal tonight. Jesus did not tell this story as a warning to other people about the kind of ground they were. He told it to a crowd, and he let every person in that crowd decide quietly for themselves which soil they recognized in their own life. Because the truth is that most people, if they are honest, I have been all four kinds of ground at different times. There are days when we are the path, when the truth comes and we hear it and we nod, and it is gone before we have finished nodding. Distracted, overloaded, packed too hard by everything pressing down on us for too long. There are days when we are the rocky ground, when something stirs us and excites us and we feel it genuinely. But when the cost arrives, we realize that the excitement was sitting on top of something shallow, and we did not know it until the heat came. There are days when we are the thorns, when all the worries and the wanting and the noise in our lives are growing faster than the thing that actually matters, and we are not sure how to stop it. But there are also days when we are the good soil, days when something lands in us and goes deep. Oh, days when we hold it in the dark without demanding it show itself before it is ready. Days when we are open enough, broken enough, humble enough for roots to go down. Those days matter more than we usually give them credit for. Tonight, in the quiet, in the dark, in the space between waking and sleeping, you are the ground, and the farmer is still scattering. The seed is still falling. Let it land somewhere deep tonight. Let it go past the surface, past the noise and the worry and the part of you that is too tired to hold on to anything else. Let it go down into the quiet place where things grow slowly and without announcement and without anyone watching. And in the morning and the week after and the season after that, something will come up. Something 30 times, something 60 times, something you did not expect from a seed that seemed so small when it first arrived. The farmer scattered it anyway. He always does. Of all the stories Jesus ever told, there is one that people remember the longest. It is not a complicated story. The language is simple. The characters are easy to understand. There are only 3 of them, a father and 2 sons. That is the whole cast. No crowds, no miracles, no dramatic setting on a hillside or a lake, just a family, just a house with a road leading away from it and a road leading back. You have heard versions of this story in 1,000 different forms without knowing it, because this story is so old and so true that it has worked its way into the bones of human storytelling itself. Every story about someone who left and came back. Every story about someone who wasted something precious and had to reckon with that. Every story about a love that did not behave the way love is supposed to behave, the love that runs when it should have waited, the love that throws a party when it should have made a speech about consequences. All of those stories, I'm somewhere in their roots, touch this one. It goes like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger son came to his father one day and said something that, in the culture of that time and place, was essentially unforgivable. He said, "Father, give me my share of the estate." Take a moment with that sentence. In that world, in that culture, you did not receive your inheritance until your father died. The inheritance was not yours yet, it was his. He had built it and worked it and maintained it, and when he was gone, it would pass to his sons. And that was the order of things, and everyone understood the order of things. Asking for it early was not simply impatient. It was not just rude in the way that grabbing the last piece of bread before everyone else is seated is rude. It was a statement, a declaration. It was the same as standing in front of your Father, your living, breathing, omnipresent Father who had raised you and fed you and given you everything you had, and saying to his face, "I wish you were already dead. Give me what I am going to get when you are gone. I would rather have the money than have you." That is what the younger son said. The father could have been angry. He would have been within every right of that culture to be furious. He could have said no. He could have said, "Get out of this house." He could have told the younger son that no son of his was going to speak to him that way and survive it with his inheritance intact. Instead, the Bible says, he divided his property between his two sons. He gave the younger one what he asked for. He let him go. The younger son took everything he had been given, which was real and significant and represented years of his father's labor, and he left. He went to a distant country. He went as far from home as he could get. And he spent his money the way people spend money when they believe, deep down, that it will never actually run out, which is to say, he spent it all at once, on everything, thinking only about right now and nothing at all about later. There is a particular kind of freedom that feels like flying and is actually falling. The younger son flew for a while, and then the money was gone. And then, because this is the way stories about being far from home tend to go, a famine hit the country he was in. A famine means the food runs out. It means the work dries up. It means the friends who were there when the money was flowing discover, surprisingly quickly, that they have places to be. The younger son found himself alone in a foreign country with nothing. He hired himself out to a man in that country who sent him to feed his pigs. In Jewish culture, pigs were unclean animals, not just less desirable, but ceremonially, religiously, fundamentally unclean. For a Jewish young man to end up on a pig farm was not just poverty. It was the particular kind of rock bottom that has a spiritual dimension to it. It was as far from his father's house in every way that mattered as it was possible to get, and he was so hungry that the slop he was throwing to the pigs looked good to him. Nobody gave him anything. He sat in the mud of that pig farm and he thought about his father's house. He thought about the table there. He thought about the smell of food being prepared in the kitchen. He thought about how even the servants in his father's house, the hired workers, the people at the very bottom of the household structure, had more than enough to eat. They were not counting pigs' slop. They were not going to sleep hungry. And here he was, the son of that man, starving in a foreign country because of every single choice he had made of his own free will, with his own two hands, or with no one forcing him anywhere he did not choose to go. The Bible says that he came to himself. That is one of the most honest phrases ever written about what it means to wake up inside your own life and see it clearly, not the version of your life you have been performing for everyone around you, not the story you have been telling yourself about why everything is someone else's fault, the real version, the one that is true even when you close your eyes. He came to himself, and he made a plan. He would go home. He would not walk back in the door expecting to be received as a son. He understood that he had walked away from that. He had cashed in his sonship along with his inheritance and spent it all in a distant country, and there was no getting it back. But his father hired workers. His father had servants who worked for wages. That was a category still available to him. He rehearsed his speech on the long walk home. "Father, and I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." He said it over and over as he walked, getting the words right, getting the tone right, humble but not pathetic, honest but not dramatic. He was not going home to perform his repentance. He was going home because he had nowhere else to go, and he was willing to work for the chance to be close to something he had thrown away. He was still a long way from the house when his father saw him. This is the part of the story that matters most, not the prodigal spending, not the pig farm, not the speech the son rehearsed on the road. This moment, this single, specific, quietly extraordinary moment. The father was not sitting inside waiting to see what would happen. He was not in a meeting with his advisors discussing whether it was wise to take the boy back. He was not drafting a list of conditions that would need to be met before any conversation about restoration could begin. He was not standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, prepared to listen to an explanation, but not yet prepared to give anything back. He was watching the road. Think about what that means. For the father to see his son while the son was still a long way off, the father had to have been looking in that direction, not just glancing occasionally, looking, watching, waiting, maybe without even fully admitting to himself that he was waiting for a figure to appear on that road that would have a particular walk, a particular set of shoulders, a particular way of moving that a father who raised a boy from the beginning would recognize from further away than anyone else could. He had been watching the road for a long time, and when he saw his son, he did not compose himself. He did not prepare a reception, and he did not call for the servants to go down to the gate and bring the boy up properly. He did not calculate whether the expression on the son's face suggested genuine remorse or just desperation. He ran. The father ran, and he threw his arms around his son, and he kissed him. The son started his rehearsed speech. He got through most of it. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He did not get to the part about being made a hired servant. Because the father was already calling to the servants behind him as he held his son in his arms. Bring the best robe, the best one, not a decent one, not a serviceable one, the best one in the house. Put a ring on his finger, put sandals on his feet, kill the fattened calf, the one that had been saved for a special occasion. This is the special occasion. We are going to celebrate. We are going to have a feast. My son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The party began. Now, before we go any further, stay with this for a moment. The son had not cleaned himself up yet. He had come from a pig farm. He was wearing whatever a person wears after weeks of feeding pigs and sleeping in a distant country with no money. He had not proven anything yet. He had not demonstrated that he had changed. He had not made any restitution. He had not paid anything back. And he had not completed a probationary period or attended any sessions with a counselor or provided any evidence that he was not going to take the next inheritance that came his way and do exactly the same thing again. He had just appeared on the road, and the father ran, and the robe was already on him before the speech was finished. This is what Jesus was telling the crowd that day. This is what he was saying to the people sitting around him who had been sorted by the religious system of their time into the category of too far gone, too many mistakes, too public, too broken, too much history, too much distance between where they were and where they would need to be before any conversation about coming back was even worth having. He was telling them that the Father had been watching the road. He was telling them that the Father ran. He was telling them that the robe comes before the completion of the speech. But the story does not end there, because there is another son. The older son had been out in the field all day, working, the way he had worked every single day since his younger brother left, faithfully and without complaint and without running away and without demanding his inheritance early. He had stayed. He had done what needed to be done. He had been the son who was present when being present was not exciting and nobody was celebrating it, and the younger brother was somewhere having the time of his life. He came home at the end of the day to the sound of music. There was a party happening in his own house, and nobody had told him about it. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. When he heard that his younger brother had returned and his father had thrown the biggest celebration the household had seen in years for him, the older son stopped walking. He would not go in. His father came out to him. And the older son said the thing he had been carrying for however long his brother had been gone. He said it plainly and without apology because the truth of it felt so obvious to him that he could not understand why it needed to be said at all. I have been here this entire time, every single day. I never disobeyed you. I never left. I never demanded anything. I gave you everything you asked for, and I never asked for anything in return. Not even a small party with my friends. Not even a young goat, not the fattened calf, just something. Some acknowledgement that what I have been doing here has mattered. And this son of yours, who took everything you gave him and wasted every coin of it on a life you would have been ashamed of, he walks back in off the road and you kill the best animal in the herd for him. The anger in the older son is not hard to understand. It is, in fact, one of the most understandable emotions in the entire story. He had done everything right. As he had stayed, he had worked, he had been faithful and present and obedient every day, that his brother was being the opposite of all those things, and the reward for all of that faithfulness appeared to be exactly nothing, while the reward for years of waste and recklessness was a robe and a ring and a party. This is not a feeling that belongs only to the first century. And this is a feeling that every person who has ever tried to do the right thing has felt when they watched someone else get celebrated for finally stopping doing the wrong thing. The faithful spouse, the child who stayed close to home, the worker who never cheated, the person who made the difficult choice every time and received for their trouble the ordinary quiet of a life without drama. The father looked at the older son with the same love he had shown the younger son on the road. Son, he said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Let that sentence land. Everything I have is yours. The older son had been standing outside his own inheritance, angry that his brother had received a welcome, not realizing that he had never been excluded from anything. The party was not a replacement of what the older son had. The party was an addition to it. The robe on the younger brother's back did not take the robe off the older brother's back. There was enough. There had always been enough. We had to celebrate, the father said. Your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. Jesus stopped the story there. He did not tell the crowd what the older brother decided to do. He did not give him a final speech of reconciliation. He did not describe the older son walking through the door and sitting down at the table. And he left the door open, and the father standing in the doorway, and the older son standing outside in the dark with a choice in front of him, because that was not an accident. The crowd listening to Jesus that day included both kinds of people. There were the ones who had gone far away and done everything wrong and were making their way back, unsure of the welcome, and there were the ones who had stayed, who had been faithful, who had done everything right, who were sitting outside something they had the right to enter, held back by a resentment that was understandable and real, and also, quietly, costing them the very thing they felt they had earned. Jesus told this story to both of them. To the ones on the road, he said this: "The Father is watching. You do not have to be clean before you start walking. You do not have to have the speech finished. You do not have to have made anything right before the first step back toward home. The Father will see you from far away because the Father has been watching the road, and he will run." To the ones standing outside in the dark, he said this: "You are always with him. Everything he has is yours." The celebration happening inside is not a threat to what you have. It is an invitation to come in and share it. The same love that ran down the road toward your brother is standing in the doorway right now, asking you to come inside. There is room at the table, and there was always room at the table. Tonight, in the quiet, you might know which son you are. You might be the one who has been far from home and is tired of the pig farm and has started slowly to think about turning around. You do not have to have everything figured out. You do not have to have a perfect speech prepared. You just have to start walking in the right direction. He will see you long before you arrive. Or you might be the one who has stayed, who has been faithful and present and done everything right and is sitting outside in the dark right now, tired and a little angry and not sure the faithfulness has been worth it. Not sure you want to go inside and sit at a table where the person who left is getting celebrated. The Father has come outside to find you too. He is standing in the doorway right now. Both of his sons are what he is watching for. Both of them are who he runs toward. The door is open. It has always been open. All come inside. A lawyer came to Jesus one day with a question. He was not the first person to come to Jesus with a question, and he would not be the last. People came to Jesus with questions constantly. Some of them were genuine. Some of them were curious. Some of them were the kind of questions that are not really questions at all, but are actually arguments wearing the clothing of a question, dressed up politely so that the person asking them can say later, "I was simply inquiring. I simply wanted to understand." This lawyer's question was that last kind. He stood up in front of the crowd that had gathered around Jesus, and he asked, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, a lawyer in first-century Jewish society was not the kind of lawyer who stands in a courtroom today. He was an expert in religious law, in the law of Moses, in the 613 commandments that govern the daily life of the Jewish people, the rules about what to eat and when to rest and how to worship and what to do when things went wrong and what to do when things went right. This man had spent his entire life studying that law. It was his profession, his identity, his expertise, the thing that made him someone worth listening to in the community. He already knew the answer to the question he was asking. Jesus knew he knew, so Jesus turned it back on him. "What does the law say? How do you read it?" The lawyer answered correctly, without hesitation. The way a person answers a question they have answered 1,000 times. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus told him he was right. Do this and you will live. And here's where the story inside the story begins. Because the lawyer, the Bible says, wanted to justify himself. He wanted to draw a boundary somewhere. And he wanted to establish that he was already doing what was required, that he was already within the lines, that the circle of his responsibility had edges he could point to and say, everything inside this circle is mine to care about, and everything outside it is not. So he asked a follow-up question. And who, he said, is my neighbor? It sounds like a simple question. It sounds almost innocent. 4 words. But underneath those 4 words is the real question, which is this: How small can I make the answer and still be considered a good person? How narrow can I draw the definition and still be within the law? Who exactly do I have to love? And who exactly am I allowed to look past without it counting against me? Jesus answered the lawyer's question with a story. A man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Anyone in that crowd who had made that journey knew exactly what Jesus was setting up. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was real and specific, and everyone knew its reputation. Jerusalem sits on a plateau about 2,500 feet above sea level. Jericho sits in the Jordan Valley about 800 feet below sea level, which means the road between them drops over 3,000 feet in elevation over the course of about 17 miles, winding down through bare, rocky, sun-bleached wilderness that offered very little in the way of shelter or safety or witnesses. Travelers knew it was dangerous. Bandits knew it was useful. The road had a name among the people of that time. They called it the Way of Blood, not because of anything poetic, because of what happened there to people who traveled it alone or unprepared. The man in Jesus' story was traveling that road, and he was attacked. The robbers who came at him did not simply take his things and leave him to walk on. They beat him. They stripped him of everything he had, his money, his clothes, everything that could be taken. And then they left him by the side of the road in the condition the Bible describes as half dead, not clearly dead, not clearly alive. That terrible middle place where a person is present enough to suffer, but too far gone to help themselves. He was just there, in the dirt, on a dangerous road in the middle of nowhere, needing someone to stop. 3 people came down that road and saw him. The first was a priest. A priest in Jewish society was not simply a religious professional. He was a figure of enormous spiritual authority. His entire life was organized around the service of God. He knew the law better than almost anyone. He had spent years, possibly his entire adult life, performing the rituals and ceremonies that maintained the relationship between his people and God. If anyone in that culture was supposed to understand what love looks like in practice, it was this man. The priest saw the man in the ditch, and he moved to the other side of the road, and he kept walking. Jesus did not explain why. He did not give the priest an internal monologue. He did not tell the crowd that the priest was in a hurry, or that he was afraid the robbers were still nearby, or that he had a ceremony to perform in Jerusalem that could not be delayed, or that the law of ceremonial cleanliness made it complicated for him to touch a man who might already be dead. He did not give the priest an excuse. He simply said the priest saw him and then crossed to the other side and passed by. The second person was a Levite. A Levite was another figure of religious authority, a man who assisted in the temple, who knew the law and its requirements as intimately as the priest did, who had dedicated his life to the service of something larger than himself. The Levite came to the place. He looked at the man. The Bible uses a specific word that implies he went close enough to see clearly. I'm close enough that there was no possibility of mistaking the situation for something other than what it was. He looked, and then he too crossed to the other side of the road and passed by. 2 religious men, 2 people who had given their lives to the service of God, 2 people who could have quoted the law about loving your neighbor without pausing to think. And both of them walked past a man who was lying in the dirt, half dead, a few feet away from them. Jesus let that sit with the crowd for a moment, and then he introduced the third traveler, a Samaritan. When Jesus said that word, something shifted in the crowd. You could have felt it. The Samaritan and the Jewish people had a centuries-long history of hostility, resentment, and mutual avoidance that went back to the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel hundreds of years before Jesus was born. The hostility had layers. It had history. It had religious dimensions and cultural dimensions and a long accumulated weight of contempt running in both directions. Jewish people did not travel through Samaria if they could go around it. They did not eat from Samaritan dishes. They did not associate with Samaritans in public if there was any other option. Earlier in the Gospel of John, when a Samaritan woman at a well was surprised that Jesus spoke to her, she said, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. She said it as a statement of fact so well established that it did not even need to be explained. That is who Jesus made the hero of his story, not another priest, not a different kind of religious official with better priorities, not a regular Jewish traveler who happened to be more compassionate than the religious leaders, a Samaritan, the person the crowd listening to Jesus would have assumed, almost automatically, was the villain of any story he appeared in. The Samaritans saw the man in the ditch, and the Bible says he had compassion, not that he calculated the risk, not that he weighed the inconvenience against the need and determined that the math worked out in favor of stopping, not that he felt a twinge of sympathy, but decided the safest course was to keep moving. He had compassion. Something in him moved toward the man before his thinking had a chance to talk him out of it. He went to him. When he knelt down beside a man who was half dead on a road known for robbers, making himself visible and stationary and vulnerable, and he began to do what needed to be done. He bandaged the man's wounds. He poured oil and wine on them, which was the standard first-century treatment for injuries, oil to soothe and wine to disinfect. He did not have a medical kit with him. He used what he had. He tore up what needed to be torn up and used it for what was needed. Then he lifted the man onto his own animal. This meant the Samaritan walked. He gave up his own transportation, his own comfort, his own pace and schedule, so that the injured man could ride. He walked beside the animal on the road to the nearest inn, matching his steps to the animal's steps, in the heat of a Judean afternoon, on a road where he himself had no guarantee of safety. At the inn, he took care of the man through the night. In the morning, or when he had to leave and continue his own journey, the one that had been interrupted and extended and made more expensive and more complicated by this detour, he gave the innkeeper 2 silver coins, 2 denarii, which was approximately 2 days of wages for a working man in that time and place, a significant amount, not a token gesture. He said to the innkeeper, "Take care of him. If it costs more than this, I will repay you when I come back." He did not ask to be thanked. He did not leave his name so the man in the inn could find him later and express gratitude. He did not make a public announcement about what he had done. He paid what was needed, promised to cover whatever additional cost arose, and left. And then Jesus turned to the lawyer. He asked him one question. "Which of these 3 men," he said, "was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The lawyer could not bring himself to say the word Samaritan. He said, "The one who showed mercy." And Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Now stay with the shape of that exchange for a moment. The lawyer had asked Jesus who his neighbor was. He was trying to establish a definition, a boundary, a line that would tell him how far his responsibility extended and where it ended. He was asking the question as a legal matter: who counts, who qualifies, who is officially within the circle of people I am required to love? Jesus did not answer that question. He answered a completely different one. Oh, he did not tell the lawyer what a neighbor is. He showed the lawyer what a neighbor does. There is a profound difference between those two things. A definition tells you who qualifies for your care. A story shows you what caring looks like when it actually happens. A definition is something you can study and debate and find loopholes in. A story is something that gets inside you and changes the way you see the road in front of you. The lawyer came to Jesus asking for a category, and Jesus gave him a Samaritan on his knees in the dirt. And the story does something else that is easy to miss if you are moving through it too quickly. The story does not ask you to be the Samaritan. That is where most people start and stop when they think about this parable. The lesson is be like the Samaritan. Be the person who stops. Be the person who crosses the road. Be compassionate. Be generous. Be present when other people walk past. And that is true. Jesus did say, "Go and do likewise." He did hold the Samaritan up as the model of what a neighbor actually is. But the story also puts you in the ditch. Before you are the Samaritan, you are the man in the dirt. You are the one who has been stripped and beaten by something on the road. You are the one who is half dead and cannot help yourself. You are the one that two religious people saw clearly and walked past. And you are the one that an unexpected person, the person you would not have chosen, the person you might have been prejudiced against, the person who did not fit into any of your existing categories of who was supposed to help you, knelt down beside you and bound your wounds and put you on their animal and carried you to safety. Jesus was not just teaching his audience how to treat other people. He was showing them how God treats people. The Samaritan in the story does not wait for the man in the ditch to clean himself up, and he does not assess whether the man deserves to be helped. He does not ask what series of choices led to this moment on this road. He does not calculate whether the man is the right kind of person or the wrong kind. He does not check whether helping him is socially advantageous or whether it will be recognized or whether the religious leaders would approve. He sees someone who needs help, and he goes to them. He uses what he has. He gives what it costs. He stays through the night. He pays what is needed and promises to cover whatever more is required. And he does all of this for a stranger on a road where nobody would have known if he had simply kept walking. Jesus was always doing this, taking the people the crowd had written off and making them the heroes, taking the people the crowd admired and showing them standing on the other side of the road, turning the expected story inside out until the people listening had no choice but to look at their own assumptions about who matters and who does not, who is worthy of care and who can be reasonably passed by. The man in the ditch does not care what category you are in. He does not care what your title is or what community you belong to or whether you and he would have been friends under other circumstances. He is not in a position to evaluate your credentials. He is just there on the ground, needing someone to cross the road. And every day, on every kind of road, in offices and hospitals and neighborhoods and families and the private landscapes of individual lives, there are people in the ditch. Some of them are very visible. Their need is obvious and their suffering is plain, and crossing the road to reach them does not require any imagination at all. Some of them are not visible at all. They are in the ditch of a very private kind of pain, the kind that does not show from the road, the kind you only see if you are already paying close attention, already looking, already moving a little slower than the pace of a busy day usually allows. The priest and the Levite were not bad people. That is the uncomfortable part of this story. They were not villains. They were not people who had devoted their lives to doing harm. They were people who had devoted their lives to something good and important. And on this particular afternoon, on this particular road, whatever was happening inside them led to the same result, as if they had never cared about anything at all. they passed by. And the question the story leaves with every person who has ever heard it is not only, are you being kind enough to strangers? The question is deeper than that. The question is, what is it in you that crosses to the other side of the road? What is the thing that sees the need and keeps moving? Or what justification feels so reasonable in the moment that you do not even have to argue with yourself about it? You just move to the other side and keep walking. Jesus told this story to a lawyer who wanted to know how small he could make the definition of neighbor and still be all right. He is telling it to us tonight for the same reason, not to make us feel guilty, not to give us a list of people we have failed, but to open something in us, to make the road a little wider, to make the ditch a little harder to walk past, to make the face of the person in it a little more difficult to look away from. Go and do likewise. 2 words, not go and think about doing likewise, not go and agree that doing likewise would be the right thing to do, not go and develop a theology of likewise and discuss it with people who already share your views. Go, do. Jesus was always bringing things back to the road in front of you, the actual road, the actual ditch, the actual person, and the actual choice happening right now in your real life on the specific Tuesday or Thursday or sleepless Sunday night of your actual existence, not the neighbor in principle, the one in front of you. Tonight, you might be the Samaritan. You might have someone in your life right now who is in the ditch, someone the rest of the world has been walking past, someone whose need has been visible for a while and is waiting for someone to stop. And you know who it is. You have known for a while. And you have things to do and places to be and very good reasons for moving to the other side. But the story will not leave you alone. It was designed not to leave you alone. And tonight, you might be the man in the ditch. You might be in the middle of something that has stripped you of more than you thought you could lose. You might have watched people walk past who you thought would stop. You might be lying there wondering if anyone is going to come, wondering if you chose the wrong road. Wondering if the distance between where you are and where you need to be is too far for anyone to carry you. The Samaritan is still on the road. He is still coming. He brings what you need. He stays through the night. He pays what it costs. And when he comes, he will not look like what you expected. He rarely does. There is a chapter in the book of Luke where Jesus tells 3 stories in a row, one right after another, without stopping between them. And all 3 stories are about exactly the same thing. They are about losing something and then finding it. He told these 3 stories on a specific day for a specific reason, and the reason matters as much as the stories themselves. The Bible tells us that the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were watching this happen, and they were not pleased about it. They were muttering among themselves, complaining. The word the Bible uses suggests a low, persistent grumbling, the kind that does not come out all at once in a single declaration, but leaks out steadily, like water finding its way through a crack. This man welcomes sinners, they said, and eats with them. Now, to understand why this bothered the Pharisees so deeply, you have to understand what eating with someone meant in that culture. It was not simply sharing a meal. It was an act of social and spiritual alignment. It was an announcement. When you sat at a table with someone, you were saying, "This person and I are in the same category. This person belongs in the same space as me. I am not separated from this person by anything that matters." The Pharisees had built their entire lives around separation, around careful, deliberate, painstakingly maintained distance from anything and anyone that was considered spiritually unclean. Their name, Pharisee, comes from a word that means separated. It was not an insult. It was a description. It was what they were. And here was Jesus eating with tax collectors. Tax collectors in that time and place were considered traitors. They were Jewish men who had taken jobs collecting taxes on behalf of the Roman occupiers, which meant they worked for the enemy and they got rich doing it, and everyone knew it. They were not allowed in the synagogue. They were not included in polite society. They were, as far as the religious establishment was concerned, exactly the kind of people you crossed to the other side of the road to avoid, and sinners was a broad category that included everyone else the religious system had placed outside the circle, the woman caught in adultery, the man with the wrong occupation, the person whose life did not conform to the standards that had been carefully constructed by people with the power to construct standards. They were all gathered around Jesus. And Jesus was not tolerating their presence at a respectful distance. He was eating with them, sitting at their tables, in their houses, looking them in the eyes over shared bread. The Pharisees muttered. And Jesus told them 3 stories. The first was about a shepherd with 100 sheep. 100 sheep is a significant flock. It is a life's work, or at least a major portion of one. A shepherd in that region knew every animal. They were not interchangeable numbers to him. And he knew their particular walks and their individual tendencies, and which ones were prone to wandering and which ones stayed close, and which ones would follow the others off a cliff without a second thought. He knew them, and one of them was gone. If you have 100 sheep, Jesus asked, and one of them wanders off and gets lost, what do you do? He answered his own question. You leave the 99 in the open country, and you go looking for the one. You leave the 99. This line troubled people when Jesus said it, and it troubles people now because it does not make practical sense. The 99 are present and accounted for. The 99 are safe. The 99 are the ones you can see, the ones you have, the ones that represent the overwhelming majority of what you are responsible for, and you are going to leave them unguarded in open country to go looking for one animal that has already demonstrated a tendency to wander off on its own. And that is not sound livestock management. That is not what any reasonable shepherd's handbook would recommend. But Jesus was not telling a story about reasonable shepherding. He was telling a story about what God is like. The shepherd in the story searches until he finds the sheep, not until the search becomes inconvenient, not until a reasonable amount of effort has been expended and can be documented, until he finds it. The search has only one end point, finding. When he finds the sheep, and he does not stand at a distance and call to it and wait for it to walk back. He does not attach a rope and drag it. He lifts it onto his shoulders. He carries it. The weight of the lost thing is now on him. He is carrying what had gone astray back to where it belongs, on his own back. And when he gets home, he calls his friends and his neighbors. Come and celebrate with me. I found my lost sheep. Then Jesus said what this means. When there is more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. More joy over one than over 99. Let that settle for a moment. The entire weight of the rejoicing, all of it, the celebration and the calling of friends and the party, it is all about the one that was lost. The 99 are not being celebrated. The 99 did not generate this kind of joy. They were safe and present, and that was good. But it did not produce a party. The one that was lost and is now found, that is what produces the party. Jesus told a second story immediately after. A woman has 10 silver coins. She loses one. 10 silver coins for a woman in that context was likely a significant portion of her household wealth. Some scholars suggest these coins may have been part of her headdress, the kind of coin jewelry that married women in that region wore as both ornamentation and financial security. If that is the case, a losing one was not just misplacing some money, it was losing something that carried meaning beyond its monetary value. She lights a lamp. She sweeps the whole house. She searches carefully until she finds it. Now think about what this image looks like. A small house, one lamp in the hand, throwing its circle of light across the floor. The woman moving that light slowly, carefully, into every corner, checking every crack and crevice and shadow. And the lamp does not stay in the middle of the room where the light is already good. The lamp goes to the dark places. The lamp goes to the corners. The lamp goes specifically to the places where you cannot see without making the deliberate effort to bring the light there. She finds it, and she calls her friends and her neighbors. Come and celebrate with me. I found my lost coin. Same response, same joy, same impulse to call the people close to her and share what she was feeling. In the same way, Jesus said, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And then he told the third story, the one about the father and the two sons, the one that lives at the center of all three like a heart inside a body, giving the other two their meaning and their warmth. But notice what the three stories together are doing. The first is about a shepherd who goes out into the hills, and he leaves safety and comfort and the majority of what he is responsible for, and he goes into the wilderness looking for one thing that is missing. He finds it and carries it home on his back. The second is about a woman who lights a lamp and sweeps every corner of her house. She does not wait for the coin to roll out on its own. She brings the light into the dark places specifically to find what is lost. The third is about a father who watches the road and runs. 3 stories. And 3 different kinds of searching, 3 different kinds of finding, 3 different celebrations. And in each one, the movement is the same. The thing that was lost is not required to find its own way back. Someone goes to find it. Someone leaves where they are and goes to where the lost thing is. The shepherd goes out into the hills. The woman sweeps every dark corner with her lamp. The father runs down the road. They all go. And this is what Jesus was saying to the Pharisees, who were muttering about him eating with sinners. He was saying, this is not a compromise of my standards. This is not me lowering the bar or approving of everything and pretending nothing matters. This is the shepherd leaving the 99. This is the woman with the lamp in the dark corner. This is the father watching the road. I am not dining with sinners in spite of who I am. I am dining with sinners because of who I am. And the going to the lost thing is not a failure of holiness. The going to the lost thing is the whole point. Now stay with this a little longer, because there is something in these 3 stories that is easy to rush past. The sheep did not find its own way back. It was lost. That is the nature of being lost. You do not have a reliable internal compass directing you home. If you did, you would not be lost. The sheep was somewhere in the hills, disoriented and alone, and the shepherd came to where it was and put it on his shoulders. The coin did not roll itself out of the dark corner. Coins do not move on their own. The coin was in the dark, out of sight, unable to announce itself, unable to ask to be found. The woman brought the light to where the coin was. This is not a small thing. There is a version of religious thinking that places the entire responsibility on the lost person. You wandered off, so you find your own way back. You ended up in the dark, and so you figure out how to get to the light. You spent your inheritance and ended up on a pig farm, so you earn your way back into your father's good graces through demonstrated improvement over a reasonable period of time. Jesus did not tell any of those stories. He told a story about a shepherd who goes. He told a story about a woman who brings the light to the dark place. He told a story about a father who was already watching, already moving, already running before the son had gotten anywhere close to the door. The initiative in all three stories belongs to the one doing the searching, not the one who is lost. The one who is lost is simply lost, and the one who searches simply searches, completely, without reservation, until finding. Now here's where these three stories reach into the room where you are resting tonight, because you might be the sheep. You might be somewhere in the hills right now, not entirely sure how you got here, or not entirely sure which direction home is, tired from wandering and a little frightened by the dark, and wondering if anyone has noticed you are gone, or if the count of the 99 was close enough that one missing did not register. It registered. The shepherd left the 99. The shepherd is already in the hills. Or you might be the coin. You might be in a dark corner of something, not lost through any dramatic act of rebellion or departure, just gradually, quietly, or slipping out of sight, the way a coin slips, the way things that are not held tightly enough slide into the dark without announcing their going. You might feel invisible in a way that is not about geography. You are close. You are right there, but no light has reached you in a long time. She has lit the lamp. She is sweeping toward your corner right now. Or you might be the younger son, which the last chapter held at length. You might be on the road, walking back from somewhere far away, on rehearsing your speech, trying to work out how to explain yourself, wondering whether the door you left through is still available to walk back in. The father is on the road. He has been watching. He is already moving. And if you feel tonight like the older son, faithful and present, and somehow still standing outside a party you should belong to, locked outside your own life by a resentment you cannot quite put down, the Father has come outside to find you too. He always comes outside. And he does not wait inside for his children to find him. He goes. He takes the lamp into the dark corner. He climbs into the hills. He runs down the road. He does not send someone else. He does not issue a statement of forgiveness from a comfortable distance. He goes. Tonight, in the quiet, you do not have to have found your way back yet. You do not have to be standing at the door with everything worked out. You do not have to be clean or ready or finished or fixed. You just have to be findable. You stay still enough to be found. The lamp is coming toward your corner. The shepherd is already in the hills calling your name, and the sound of the party, the celebration that has already started for you, the rejoicing that happens in heaven over one, is closer than the dark around you right now. Be still. Let yourself be found. There is a kind of prayer that feels embarrassing, not the formal kind. Not the prayer you say at the beginning of a meal or the one you offer at the start of a service when everyone is listening and the words come out shaped and careful and appropriate. Not the prayer that sounds like prayer is supposed to sound. The embarrassing kind is the other one. The one at 2 a.m. when you have asked for the same thing so many times that you have started to feel foolish for still asking. The one where the words are not shaped or careful, and where they come out more like a fist on a door than a composed request. The one where you are not entirely sure the door is being heard through, or whether anyone is on the other side of it, or whether the knocking itself has become a kind of desperate habit that says more about your need than your faith. That is the prayer Jesus told his disciples to keep praying. He did not tell them to stop when it started feeling like too much. He did not tell them to scale back the asking when the answer did not come quickly. He did not suggest that unanswered prayer was a signal to conclude that the request had been considered and declined, and it was time to move on. He told them a story about a man who was woken up in the middle of the night, and then he told them another story about a widow who would not stop coming back, and then he said, "Ask, seek, knock." And he said it the way you say something to people who have already stopped doing it, the way you say, "Keep going" to someone who has already slowed down, the way you say, "Do not give up" to someone who is standing at a door in the dark, wondering if anyone is home and how much longer they are supposed to stand there. So let's start at the beginning. A man was asleep. It was midnight, which in that world meant the household was fully dark and fully still. There was no ambient light coming in from the street. There were no other sounds to break the quiet. The children were in bed, which in a small first-century home likely meant they were in the same room as their parents, everyone sleeping on mats on the floor or on a low platform. The door bolted against the night. Then someone knocked. The man who was knocking was a friend. He had an urgent problem. A traveler had arrived at his house unexpectedly, which in the culture of that time and place created an immediate and serious obligation. Hospitality in first-century Jewish and Middle Eastern culture was not optional. It was not a nicety. It was a moral and social responsibility of the highest order. A guest who arrived at your door, expected or not, was to be received and fed and cared for. To fail in this was not simply rude. It was a matter of deep shame. So the friend at the door had a traveler in his house and nothing to feed him. And he knocked on his neighbor's door at midnight and asked for 3 loaves of bread. The man inside called back through the bolted door, "Do not bother me. The door is already locked. My children are in bed with me. I cannot get up and give you anything." Now read the refusal carefully. He did not say, "I do not want to help you." He did not say, "You are not my friend," or "Your need does not matter." He said, "I cannot. The door is already locked. The children are already asleep." On getting up means unlocking the door, which means noise, which means the children wake up, which means the rest of the night unravels for everyone in the house. His reasons were real. His inconvenience was genuine. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had been asleep and was now awake at midnight with a friend asking for bread and a very reasonable list of logistical complications standing between him and helping. But the friend kept knocking. He did not accept the refusal as final. He did not say, "I understand. I am sorry to have bothered you. I will figure something else out." He stayed at the door. He kept asking. He persisted with the particular kind of persistence that does not argue or demand or grow hostile, but simply does not leave. And Jesus said that because of the friend's boldness, because of his shameless persistence, the man inside eventually got up and gave him everything he needed, not because he was a good friend who wanted to help, because the friend would not stop knocking. Now, Jesus was careful about what he did with this story. He did not say God is like the reluctant man inside the house. He did not draw a straight line between the neighbor who needed to be pestered into helping and the nature of God. What he did is what careful teachers do with stories. He made an argument from the smaller thing to the larger thing. If even a person who is inconvenienced, who has every reason to stay in bed, who has children asleep and a bolted door and a legitimate list of reasons not to get up, if even that person eventually responds to persistent asking, then consider what that means about a God who is not inconvenienced, a God who is not asleep, a God who is not behind a bolted door wondering whether your need is worth the disruption to his evening. How much more will that God respond? How much more, and how much sooner, and how much more generously? Then Jesus told the second story. And there was a judge in a certain town. Jesus described this judge with 2 qualities, and both of them were damning. He did not fear God, and he did not care about people. which means he was operating entirely outside the two things that were supposed to give a judge his moral foundation. He had authority without accountability. He had power without compassion. He made decisions from a position of complete self-interest, and nobody could stop him. He was not a good man. A widow came to him with a case. Widows in first century society occupied one of the most vulnerable positions available to a human being. They had no husband to advocate for them. They typically had limited financial resources. They had very little social standing and very little leverage in legal or public matters. A widow with a case before an unjust judge was about as disadvantaged as a person could be in that system. She came to him and asked for justice against someone who had wronged her. And he refused. She came back. He refused again. She came back again. The Bible does not tell us how many times this happened. It uses language that implies repeated returns over a period of time. This was not a single conversation. This was a pattern. She came and came and came, and the judge refused and refused and refused, and still she came back. And eventually the judge said something to himself that Jesus recorded with a kind of deliberate honesty that makes the story memorable. He said, I do not fear God, and I do not care about this woman, but she keeps bothering me. She is wearing me out. I am going to give her justice just so she will stop coming back, not because he had a change of heart, not because the merits of her case finally got through to him, not because he developed compassion overnight, because she would not stop coming. Her persistence outlasted his refusal, and Jesus drew the same kind of argument he drew from the first story. If even this judge, this man who does not fear God and does not care about people, if even he eventually responds to someone who will not give up asking, what does that say about God, who is not unjust, who is not indifferent, who does care, who does love the people who come to him, who is not looking for reasons to keep the door closed? Will God not bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? And then Jesus said something that stopped the disciples. When the Son of Man comes, he said, will he find faith on the earth? It is a question that lands differently than you expect it to. Jesus had just finished telling his disciples to keep asking and keep seeking and keep knocking. And then he asked whether, when he returned, he would find people still doing it, which implies he knew it was the thing most likely to stop, not the big dramatic failures of faith, not the sudden abandonments or the violent rejections, the quiet stopping, and the slow trailing off of the asking, the gradual acceptance that the door is probably not going to open and therefore it is not worth standing here anymore. The particular kind of faithlessness that does not look like faithlessness from the outside because it looks like maturity, like realism, like a grown person who has learned not to expect too much. Jesus said, keep knocking. He said, blessed are the people who keep coming back. He said, the persistence itself is the faith. Now there is something else in these two stories that is important to hold alongside everything else. Both of them involve need. The friend at midnight needed bread because a traveler had arrived. The widow needed justice because someone had wronged her. Neither of them was asking for something frivolous. Neither of them was at the door at midnight because they were bored or because they wanted to test whether the system worked. They needed something, and they could not stop needing it just because the first ask was refused. This is the condition that Jesus was addressing. He was not talking to people who had a passing preference they were hoping God might accommodate when convenient. He was talking to people who had real needs, needs that did not go away with time, needs that came back every morning whether or not the previous night's prayer had been answered, needs that a person could not simply decide to stop having. And the friend needed the bread tonight, right now because the guest was hungry tonight. The widow needed justice today because the wrong done to her was real today. You cannot schedule that kind of need for a more convenient time. You cannot decide to wait until you feel more confident that the asking will be received. The need is there in the middle of the night, whether you knock on the door or not. And so you knock. Jesus also said something in the passage surrounding these stories that goes even deeper than the stories themselves. He said, "Which of you fathers, if your son asks for a fish, will give him a snake? Or if he asks for an egg, will give him a scorpion? If you then, being imperfect, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?" The argument is the same shape as the other two, but it is warmer, more personal, and less about persistence in the face of resistance, and more about the nature of the one being asked. You already know how to give good things to people you love. You already understand, without being taught, that when someone you love comes to you with a real need, you do not give them something harmful when you have something good available. You do not trick them. You do not withhold from them for sport. And you give them what they need because you love them and they need it, and giving it to them is simply what love does. If you know that, imperfect as you are, then think about what God knows. Think about how much more certain it is that when you come to him with a real need, he is not holding something harmful behind his back. He is not playing games with your hunger. He is not waiting to see how long you will keep asking before he decides whether you deserve an answer. He is a father. He knows what good gifts are. He knows what you need. He was not surprised when you came to the door. He was not asleep when you knocked. Now let the stories touch the specific thing you are carrying tonight, because you are probably carrying something. You do not end up listening to a quiet reading at this hour of the night with nothing on your heart. There is something you have been asking about, and something that has been in your prayers long enough that the asking has started to feel like a habit you are not sure is still connected to hope. Something you have brought to the door so many times that you have started to feel foolish about bringing it again. Keep bringing it. Keep knocking. Not because God needs to be worn down the way the unjust judge needed to be worn down. Not because persistence earns you anything or changes the math in some spiritual accounting system. Well, but because the knocking itself is the relationship. The coming back is the faith. The refusal to stop asking is the declaration that you believe someone is on the other side of the door. That belief, maintained in the dark, at midnight, when the answers have not come and the need has not changed and the door has not opened yet, that is the thing Jesus was asking about when the Son of Man comes. Will he find faith on the earth? Not perfection, not achievement, not a life that has been organized correctly from beginning to end. Faith, the persistent, returning, will not stop asking, still knocking at midnight kind of faith. That is what he is looking for, and that is what these stories are an invitation to keep practicing. The door is not locked against you. The Father inside is not asleep. He has not missed a single knock. He has heard everyone from the first one to tonight. There is something he is doing in the waiting that you cannot see yet. There is work happening on the other side of the door that the door being closed does not mean is not happening. The timing belongs to him. The how and the when and the form the answer takes belongs to him. That is the part you cannot control. What you can control is whether you stay at the door. Stay at the door, keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking, because the promise attached to the knocking is not that the door will open immediately. The promise is simpler and more certain than that. I'm everyone who knocks, everyone. The door will be opened. not because you knocked the right number of times, or in the right way, or with the right words, because he is on the other side of it, and he has been listening to every knock since the first one, and he is not the reluctant neighbor. He is not the unjust judge. He is the father who gives good gifts to his children. He is the one who, when his child stands at the door at midnight with bread for a hungry guest, Alco does not call back through the door with a list of reasons why tonight is inconvenient. He opens it. He has always been going to open it. Knock tonight. Whatever it is you have been carrying, whatever it is you have been asking about, whatever door has been in front of you long enough that you have started to doubt whether your knocking is reaching anyone at all. Knock again. He hears you. He has always heard you. The door is already opening. There is a moment that happens sometimes, or at the end of a very good story, where you sit quietly for a little while before you do anything else, not because you are confused, not because you did not follow it, but because something in the story found something in you, and you need a moment to let them finish their conversation before the rest of the world comes back in. You need a moment to just sit with what happened. That is the moment we are in now. We have spent this night with the stories Jesus told. I'm the farmer scattering seed on 4 kinds of ground. The younger son on the road home, and the older son standing in the dark outside the party, the man in the ditch and the one who crossed the road when 2 others did not, the shepherd in the hills and the woman with her lamp in the corner and the father watching the road, the friend at midnight who would not stop knocking, and the widow who outlasted a judge who did not care. These stories have been in the world for 2,000 years. And they are not tired. They do not get tired the way other things get tired. They do not wear out from being told too many times. They do not lose their edge. Every generation that sits with them finds something in them that feels like it was placed there specifically for this time, this person, this particular weight being carried on this particular night. That is not an accident. Jesus was a carpenter's son who understood that the things built to last are built differently from the things built to impress. The things built to last are not always the most elaborate. They are not always the most immediately striking, but they are the ones still standing when everything built for appearance has long since come down. These stories were built to last, and tonight they have been doing what they were always built to do, finding people. So before you fall asleep, before the quiet takes you all the way under, stay here for just a little longer. Think about what the parables of Jesus are really saying when you lay them all next to each other and look at them together. They are not a collection of moral instructions dressed up in story form. They are not a list of things you are supposed to do and things you are supposed to stop doing, arranged cleverly so that they go down easier than a list would. They are not primarily about your behavior at all, and they are about what God is like, what God actually does, how God actually moves. The farmer in the first story scatters his seed everywhere, on the hard ground and the shallow ground and the thorny ground, not just the ground that looks most promising. He does not withhold the seed from the places where it might not take. He opens his hands over all of it. He gives the same seed to all 4 kinds of ground and trusts the process he cannot control once the seed leaves his hand. And the shepherd in the third story leaves the 99, does not stay where it is comfortable and safe and all accounted for, goes into the hills, into the dark and the wild and the inconvenient places, goes until finding. The woman lights her lamp and takes it to the dark corners, does not wait for the coin to find its way into the light on its own, brings the light to where the lost thing is. The father watches the road, runs, does not compose himself. Does not wait for the speech to be finished, does not ask for the accounting of everything that was wasted before he will allow his arms to open. He runs. The Samaritan crosses the road when 2 more qualified people did not. kneels down in the dirt, stays through the night, pays what it costs, and promises to cover whatever more is needed. The shepherd goes, the woman sweeps, the father runs, the Samaritan crosses. Do you see what all of them have in common? Movement. In every single story Jesus told about what God is like, God is the one moving toward the person who needs something, not standing at a careful distance and assessing whether the approach is deserved, not issuing conditions from behind a closed door, not waiting in a well-lit room for people to find their way there on their own, moving toward. This is the thing that made the religious establishment of Jesus' time so uncomfortable. They had built an entire system around the idea that holiness meant separation, that the way you demonstrated your closeness to God was by demonstrating your distance from everything impure, that the circle of the acceptable was carefully drawn and maintained, and anyone outside it was responsible for finding their own way in, or living with the consequences of being outside. And Jesus kept going to the outside. He kept sitting at the tables of the wrong people. He kept telling stories where the Samaritan was the hero and the priest was the one who crossed the road. He kept making the lost thing the center of the celebration. He was not breaking the rules by accident. He was showing them something the rules had obscured. He was showing them that the God they thought required careful, maintained distance from the broken and the lost was actually the shepherd in the hills looking for the one, was actually the father running down the road, was actually the lamp being carried into the corner where the coin had been lying in the dark. He was showing them that the entire project of God had always been about closing the distance, not requiring the lost to find their way back from a great distance before any welcome was possible, but going to where the lost thing was, carrying it home. Now here is what you need to know before you close your eyes tonight. These stories were not told to crowds that had everything together, and they were not told to people who had successfully maintained the right distance from the wrong things. They were not told to the 99 who stayed in the field without wandering. They were told on hillsides and shorelines to people who were exhausted and confused and doubting and broken and far from where they started and not entirely sure that anything good was still available to them. They were told to people like you, not a version of you that has everything worked out, not the you that is further along than you currently are, not the you that has finally managed to be consistently the kind of person you keep intending to become. The you that is here tonight, tired, carrying something, asking questions that have not been answered yet, standing at doors that have not opened yet, somewhere between where you came from and where you are trying to get to. The stories were for that person. The seed was scattered on the ground you are right now, not the ground you plan to be. The shepherd is in the hills looking for the sheep that is actually missing, which means the one that is actually lost, which might be you tonight. And the search is not hypothetical. The lamp is moving toward the corner where you actually are, not the corner where you plan to be once you have sorted yourself out. The Father is watching the road you are actually on. Tonight, you do not have to have a response prepared. You do not have to have understood every story perfectly. You do not have to have arrived at a clean conclusion or felt the right feeling or made a decision or prayed the right prayer. The seed is in the ground. Let it be in the ground. You do not have to dig it up every 10 minutes to check on it. You do not have to keep turning the soil to see if anything has started yet. You do not have to manage the growth. The growth is not your job. And the growth belongs to the seed and the soil and the rain and the sun and the patient darkness where things become what they were always meant to be. Your job tonight is to receive, to be the ground that stays open, to hold what was planted here tonight in the quiet dark, and trust that something is already happening in you that you cannot see yet, because that is what good soil does. It does not announce itself, it just stays and holds, and in the morning and the week after and the season after that, something comes up, something 30 times, something 60 times, something 100 times what the seed seemed capable of when it first arrived and went down into the dark. Let the Father find you on the road tonight. Let the shepherd put you on his shoulders. Let the lamp reach the corner where you have been. Let the door open. It is opening. It has been opening since the first time you knocked. Every story Jesus told was a door, not a wall. Not a list of requirements posted on a gate. A door, an opening. Something you walk through into a larger space than the one you were standing in before. Tonight, through these stories, you have been standing in that larger space. Even if you fell asleep somewhere in the middle of the shepherd on the hillside or the younger son on the road, even if the words washed over you more than they landed in you, even if you are not sure what you feel or what you believe or whether any of this reached the part of you that needed reaching, the seed was scattered. It goes where it goes. It does what it does, in the dark, quietly, without your help. And the farmer is not worried. He has seen this before. He has seen the seed go into the ground and the ground go quiet and the surface show nothing for a long time. And then one morning, without warning, without announcement, without asking anyone's permission, the green thing comes up. It always comes up. It came up for the people on those hillsides 2,000 years ago. It comes up still. It is coming up in you. Close your eyes now. Let the stories settle down into the quiet places where roots go. The farmer has already scattered. The shepherd already has you on his shoulders. The Father is already celebrating. The door is already open. Sleep well, child of God. You are found. And now, beloved, the stories have been told. The chapters are finished. While the explanations are done, there is nothing more to understand tonight, nothing more to figure out, nothing more to hold on to with the thinking part of your mind. What comes next is simpler. What comes next is just the words, the actual words written down 2,000 years ago that have been read in the dark by people who needed them in every century since. Words that have been whispered over sick children and carried into prison cells and read by candlelight in rooms where hope was in short supply. Words that have outlasted every empire and every argument and every attempt to replace them with something more modern or more manageable. They do not need help from me anymore tonight. They just need you to receive them. So let your body go heavier now. Let your breathing slow all the way down. Let your hands rest open instead of closed. Let the thoughts that are still moving in your mind begin gently to slow. You do not need to hold on to them tonight. You do not need to solve anything before morning. You do not need to have an answer for the thing that has been sitting on your chest since Tuesday or since last year or since whenever it arrived and decided to stay. Let it rest beside you tonight instead of on top of you. And let the words of Jesus, the actual words, and the ones he spoke on hillsides and shorelines to tired people who needed them, let them be the last thing that moves through you before sleep takes you all the way under. Let them go down into the quiet place where the seed goes. And in the morning you will not remember every word, but something will have grown. It always does. The parables of Jesus, as they were written, from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places,